Not a dog. The truth behind this German Shepherd puppy, Scene 1, The Silence in Queens. In a cramped apartment tucked deep within the heart of Queens, New York, Eric Reynolds sat hunched over a chipped kitchen counter, watching the last crystals of instant coffee swirl into muddy water. The morning light filtered weakly through the window, casting long, tired shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Around him, the world buzzed with urgency, emails flashing red on his laptop, a blinking microwave clock reminding him it was already 7:15 a.m. But inside, time felt like it had frozen. Across the room, his 7-year-old daughter, Lucy, sat silently at their kitchen table, her Hello Kitty backpack resting by her feet. She wasn't eating. She rarely did anymore. Instead, her small fingers pushed a broken blue crayon across a sheet of paper in slow, endless circles. Her cereal had turned soggy, untouched. And she hadn't spoken a single word, not since that terrible Tuesday afternoon nearly a year ago when an aneurysm took her mother Sarah without warning. Eric tried to sound cheerful, suggesting rainbows and peanut butter sandwiches, but all he got was silence. Lucy's long brown hair fell like a curtain over her face, a shield from a world she no longer trusted. Eric recognized the signs. He was living with a little girl who had retreated far inside herself, so far that even he, her father, couldn't always reach her. And the weight of that silence hung heavy in the air, a grief too deep for words. Scene 2. A desperate hope. That evening, after another silent dinner and a bedtime routine filled only with unspoken rituals, Eric sat alone in the dim light of their apartment. His laptop glowed on the coffee table, surrounded by unopened bills and Lucy's untouched lunchbox. The silence had become unbearable. He stared at the search bar and, almost without thinking, typed, "Dog Adoption NYC." It was irrational, even reckless. How could he add more responsibility to a life already bursting at the seams? He was barely managing rent, work deadlines, and Lucy's therapy bills. But in the quiet, he remembered something, how Lucy used to talk about dogs before. She had drawn pictures of golden retrievers with floppy ears, invented stories about magical puppies who guarded little girls, and even named imaginary ones. Back then her voice was alive, filled with laughter. Maybe, just maybe, a dog could help her find that voice again. He scrolled through rows of shelter listings until one image stopped him cold. A young German shepherd, too thin with paws far too large for his body. His fur looked patchy, and ribs showed beneath his dull coat. But it was the eyes, deep, brown and mournful, that made Eric pause. There was something human in that gaze, something gentle, like the dog understood what it meant to lose something. The description was brief. Found behind warehouse, no tags, male, estimated 5 months, calm temperament. Eric hovered over the bookmark button, hesitating. Their apartment was too small. Their lives were too fragile. But there was something about that dog that wouldn't let him look away. He clicked the bookmark and quickly slammed the laptop shut, like someone had just caught him making a wish he wasn't supposed to make. The next morning, after a panicked phone call from Lucy's school, another panic attack during music class, Eric made a decision. He took Lucy by the hand, looked into her quiet, frightened eyes, and whispered, "I have a surprise for you." And that was the moment everything began to change. Scene 3. The Silent Guardian. From the moment they brought him home, Moose was different. The big puppy moved through their small Queens apartment with a quiet, deliberate grace that seemed almost too mature for his age. He didn't bark, not once. He didn't whine, didn't beg, didn't even jump onto the furniture like most young dogs would. Instead, he simply observed, watching everything with those deep, intelligent eyes, as if studying the rhythms of their life. He followed Lucy everywhere, always at her side, but never in her way. If she moved to the kitchen, he would sit in the hallway. If she sat on the floor, he'd lie beside her, massive paws stretched out protectively. When she slept, Moose would station himself just outside her bedroom doorway, his body stretched across the threshold like a silent sentinel. No command had been given. He just knew. And the strangest part? He seemed to already understand their routine. Within days, Moose was waiting by the door at school time, tail still, posture alert, as if he had memorized the schedule. He never needed training, no scolding, no coaxing. He simply adapted like he was made for it. Even the vet was baffled. Moose had gained almost 10 pounds in just a few days, his frame growing broader, his fur thicker. "He's not just a shepherd," the vet murmured, examining his bone structure. "I don't know what he is." But Eric didn't care, because Lucy was changing too. She was still mostly silent, but there were flickers now, moments when her eyes followed Moose, when the corners of her mouth would twitch upward as he nudged her hand with his nose. One night, as Moose lay beside her, she whispered his name again. Moose. Just one word. But to Eric it sounded like a miracle. Scene 4. A voice begins to return. In just a few days, it wasn't only Moose who had changed, Lucy was changing too. The apartment still felt small, almost comically so with Moose's growing frame, but the space now carried a softness it hadn't known in months. There were subtle signs at first. Lucy began eating small bites of cereal again, her eyes no longer empty, but quietly aware. Moose would lie beside her at the coffee table, his head resting near her feet, nudging her hand gently when she stopped chewing. Each nudge seemed to pull her back from somewhere far away. Eric, watching from the kitchen with his coffee in hand, tried not to hope too hard. But then came the morning he couldn't ignore. Lucy was humming, not loudly, barely more than a whisper. But she sat, brushing Moose's thick coat with an old hairbrush, humming softly to herself, her face calm, focused. Moose lay perfectly still, his dark eyes half closed in contentment, his tail thumping softly in response to her quiet song. It was the first true peace Eric had seen in her in almost a year. Later that day, as Lucy sat at the coffee table drawing in her notebook, she stood up and placed it in front of Eric without saying a word. He opened it and found a simple, clumsy drawing, a large creature with 4 legs, pointed ears, and a familiar, watchful gaze. Moose. It was the first thing she had shared with him voluntarily since Sarah's death. He looked up, throat tightening, but Lucy had already returned to Moose's side, her fingers curling in his thick fur. That night, as Moose stretched out across her bedroom floor like a silent guardian, Lucy whispered from beneath her covers, "Good night, Dad." Just 2 words, but they struck Eric harder than any storm, because they were the beginning of something they thought they had lost forever. Lucy's voice. Scene 5. The dog that didn't fit the world around him. Moose was growing fast, too fast. Within just 2 weeks, the collar they had bought barely fit around his neck. His ribs had vanished beneath a thickening coat, his frame expanding like something from a fairy tale. He moved with grace, always careful not to bump furniture, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Moose was far too big for their apartment and their world. The neighbors began to notice. It started with uneasy glances in the hallway, then whispered complaints through thin walls. One afternoon, as Moose's tail thumped softly against the wall, a loud banging erupted from the unit below. Eric apologized through the door, but the tension didn't go away. It only escalated. Then came the knock. Eric opened the door to find Mr. Delgado, their downstairs neighbor, and a retired police officer, standing with arms folded, eyes narrowed. He wasn't just annoyed, he was studying Moose. "That's no German shepherd," he said quietly, nodding toward the dog who sat calmly at Lucy's side, alert but unmoving. "I worked canine for 15 years. I know breeds. That one's something else." Eric tried to explain, said they'd adopted Moose from a shelter, that he'd never shown aggression, but Delgado didn't budge. "Calm doesn't mean safe," he warned. That dog's going to keep growing. You don't know what he really is, and you're gambling with your daughter's life." Eric stood frozen in the doorway, Lucy watching from behind the couch, her small hands buried in Moose's fur. "You have 48 hours, Delgado said as he turned to leave, "or I'll make the call." As the door clicked shut, Eric felt the walls closing in. Moose was family now. He had brought Lucy back from silence, but now that gift was under threat. And worse, a question had begun to take root in Eric's mind. What if Delgado was right? Scene 6. The crash that changed everything. It happened in an instant. One quiet afternoon, Lucy asked to pick dandelions in the courtyard, a simple request that weeks ago would have been unthinkable. Eric watched from the apartment window as she wandered through the grass in her yellow raincoat, clutching the fluffy seeds like they were tiny wishes. Then he heard the shouting.
Axel, Axel, get back here!
Eric's heart stopped. Through the glass, he saw it. A pit bull charging across the courtyard, its leash trailing behind, its body barreling straight toward Lucy. She froze, too stunned to move.
And then a crash.
The screen door behind Eric shattered as Moose exploded through it, tearing it from its hinges like paper. His massive frame leapt down the stairs in a blur of muscle and instinct. Before Eric could even react, Moose collided with the pit bull mid-sprint.
But what happened next wasn't violence.
Moose didn't snarl, didn't bite, he didn't even bark. Instead, he used his size, pinning the pit bull to the ground with absolute control. Silent, still, and terrifying in his precision. He held Axel down, unmoving, until Troy, the other dog's owner, arrived breathless and furious. "He attacked my dog," Troy shouted. "Your monster is dangerous." Neighbors poured into the courtyard. Phones came out, accusations flew, but Eric couldn't hear any of it. He was already kneeling beside Lucy, who trembled in his arms, still clutching her dandelions. Moose stepped back slowly, positioning himself between Lucy and the chaos, his eyes locked on her as if to say, "I've got you."
But it wasn't over.
Within the hour, 2 animal control officers stood in their living room. "There's been a report of an aggressive incident involving a large dog," one officer said. Despite Eric's pleas, despite Moose's calm, controlled actions, they took him, and as Moose disappeared down the hallway, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face, something inside her shattered. The silence returned. Scene 7, taken. The apartment felt hollow without him. Moose's bed still lay by the door, his blanket creased with the weight of a body, no longer there. His bowl sat full. The leash hung where Eric had left it. But the silence wasn't healing. It was the old kind, the kind that wrapped around Lucy like fog and pulled her back into herself. She hadn't spoken a word since the officers took Moose away. Eric had tried everything, cooked her favorite dinner, put on the cartoons she used to watch, even tried to read aloud one of her bedtime books. But she just stared, unmoving, clutching Moose's collar like it was the only piece of the world she still trusted. Animal control had made it clear. Moose would be held for a mandatory 72-hour behavioral assessment. They said it was routine, but Eric saw the way they looked at Moose, with fear, not understanding. Desperate, he called the shelter where he adopted Moose, hoping for answers. But all they had was a vague record. Found behind warehouse. No microchip, likely dumped. Breed unknown. No one knew what he was. No one knew what he meant to Lucy. That night, Eric sat on the floor outside her bedroom. She was curled up on her bed, fully dressed, turned to the wall. Her hand still clutched Moose's collar, her fingers tracing his name over and over like a broken prayer. And for the first time in months, Eric felt powerless again, as if everything Moose had helped them rebuild was crumbling right in front of him. He opened his laptop, staring at the screen. Searches filled his history. How to get your dog out of quarantine. What counts as an aggressive dog? Appealing animal control decisions. But none of them could answer the only question that mattered. How do you explain to a grieving child that the one creature who brought her back to life might not come home. Scene 8. The fight for Moose. Eric couldn't sleep. While Lucy lay in bed unmoving, Moose's collar pressed against her chest like a lifeline, Eric sat hunched over his laptop, searching, reading, fighting. He knew one thing for sure: if they lost Moose, he would lose Lucy again, and this time he feared she might never come back. He started with the facts. The building had a 50-pound pet limit. Moose had long surpassed that. But that wasn't the real issue. The real threat was the label, aggressive. If Moose was officially deemed dangerous, they might never get him back. Eric called every neighbor who might have seen what happened. Most were hesitant, but slowly, quietly, support began to form. Sarah in 2D, a kind art student, gave a written statement. The pit bull charged first. Moose didn't bite, he just held the other dog down, calmly. Then came Mr. Chen from 3A. That big dog's protective, not violent. He watches the girl like a guardian. With each new piece of paper, Eric's hope grew.
But it wasn't enough. He needed more, so he turned to science.
He dug out Moose's old brush from the bathroom, carefully collecting fur. Through tears and trembling fingers, he ordered a rush DNA test, desperate to prove Moose wasn't some unpredictable mutt. Maybe, just maybe, the answer to saving Moose lay in his blood. Meanwhile, Lucy remained wordless, her presence like a shadow. But Eric saw her fingers still moving, tracing Moose's name on the collar. Holding on. That afternoon, Dr. Reiner, their therapist, called back immediately after hearing what had happened. "Bring me anything you can," she said. "Letters, statements, photos. Moose has been critical to Lucy's recovery. That separation, it's already having serious psychological effects." Eric printed every photo of Moose curled beside Lucy, every crayon drawing, every fragile smile. Because this wasn't just about a dog anymore. It was about a child, and the one soul who never left her side. Scene 9. The truth about Moose. The morning of the hearing, the sky hung low and grey over the city. Eric stood outside the municipal building, clutching a leather folder filled with everything: witness statements, therapy letters, photographs, DNA results, everything that might convince the board that Moose wasn't a threat, but a lifeline. Inside, the room was sterile. Fluorescent lights, a long table, 3 officials, an animal control supervisor, a city legal rep, and a veterinary consultant. Eric sat alone on the other side, hands trembling beneath the table. "Mr. Reynolds," the supervisor began, "we're here to determine whether the dog known as Moose poses a danger to the public. Please present your case." Eric took a breath, then placed his phone on the table and pressed play. A video began. Lucy sitting on the floor, her voice soft and clear, telling a story to Moose, who lay beside her, motionless but listening. The room went quiet as her voice played on. "She didn't speak for nearly a year," Eric said, voice tight. "Not one word after her mother died. Moose brought her voice back." He passed them the letter from Dr. Reiner. It detailed Lucy's emotional recovery, the return of speech, trust and connection, all tied directly to Moose's presence. Then came the DNA results. "Moose isn't just a large shepherd mix," Eric said. "He's 75% Caucasian Ovcharka, a breed known for protecting children. He's not aggressive, he's discerning. He didn't attack, he protected." The board members exchanged glances. Even the vet consultant nodded. That restraint is not typical, but it's remarkable. Then the door opened. To Eric's surprise, Mr. Delgado stepped in.
"I was wrong," he said plainly. "That dog isn't a monster. He's a guardian. That little girl needs him."
The board paused for what felt like eternity. Then the supervisor spoke. "The dog will be released to your custody immediately. With proper documentation, he is not classified as a restricted breed." Eric exhaled for the first time in days. They were bringing Moose home. Scene 10. Home, finally. The sun had barely risen when Eric pulled into the parking lot of the animal control facility. The air was cold and still, but inside his heart raced with warmth and relief. A young kennel worker greeted him with a clipboard and a quiet smile. He's been waiting, didn't eat much, barely slept, but he's been watching the hallway like he knew you'd come. She led Eric down the corridor, and then, at the end of the row, Moose. The massive dog rose the moment he saw him. No bark, no sound, just those intelligent eyes lighting up and a slow, deliberate wag of the tail. Eric knelt, pressing his hand to the thick glass.
"I told you I'd come," he whispered.
Minutes later, Moose walked beside him, leash clipped loosely to his collar, steps perfectly in sync with Eric's. When they reached the car, Eric sent a quick message to Lucy. He's coming home. At the apartment, Lucy sat curled on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket she hadn't let go of in days. When Moose stepped through the door, she didn't move at first, but then she ran, wordless, wide-eyed, arms flung around his thick neck. "Moose," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, but her smile said everything. Later that evening, Lucy fell asleep with her arms around him, her breathing soft and steady. And for the first time in a long time, the apartment didn't feel small or broken or heavy with grief. It felt like home, because somehow, some way, the creature they rescued had rescued them right back.